2009's Terminator Salvation, the fourth entry in the Terminator franchise, directed by McG and written by John Brancato and Michael Ferris. This, of course, followed up 2003's Terminator 3: Rise of the Machine. It had stars Christian Bale, Sam Worthington, Anton Yelchin, Moon Bloodgood, Bryce Dallas Howard, among others. Now, this film is interesting for many, many reasons. How it came to be is probably the most interesting journey, and it'll be what I'll be focusing on at the start of this retrospective review, before I get to my personal thoughts on this film. Now, for those that don't know, the development for this film was essentially hell. It was an incredibly interesting thing to follow. In 1999, 2 years after C2 Pictures purchased the rights, 2 Terminator films were mapped out and were supposed to be developed simultaneously. Now, this is a common theme and trend among the Terminator franchise. The great James Cameron has sold the rights many, many, many times over because, of course, he famously has essentially gone on record and said that the story was done. Now, Teddy Sarafian was hired to write Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, which he obviously eventually received story credit for, while David C. Wilson was to write Terminator 4 before any revisions were done. Now, initially, T3 took place in 2001 and revolved around the very first attacks between Skynet and humans, which of course then developed into the Terminator 3: Rise of the Machines, which we saw a insane parody of itself with some high notes here and there. Now, T4 would follow immediately afterward and centered primarily on the war briefly seen in the first 2 films. Now, this is really important because Terminator 3 initially was written as a 2-feature production. Now, Warner Brothers gave the film the codename Project Angel. And following the release of Terminator 3 in 2003, producers Andrew G. Vajna and Mario Casa contracted Nick Stahl and Claire Danes to return as John Connor and Kate Brewster in another film. Director Jonathan Mostow helped develop the script, which was written by John Brancato and Michael Ferris, and was set to begin production in 2005. This is, of course, after completing another film and having their schedules come free. It was known by then that Arnold Schwarzenegger's role would be very limited, as he had assumed office as governor of California. However, he was still interested in the role. The producers sought to have Warner Brothers finance the picture as they did for T3, and in 2005, Stahl said that John and Kate would be recast as the story had jumped forward in time. By 2006, though, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, or MGM, which is a successor to Orion Pictures, was set to distribute the 4th film as part of the new CEO Harry Slogan's scheme to make the studio a viable Hollywood player, which, side note, MGM have actually been making some big waves recently. More so this year with the Child's Play remake and the rumours that RoboCop would have a new entry. Now, on May 9th, 2007, it was announced that the production rights to the Terminator series had passed from the now feuding Vajna and Casa to the Halcyon Company. Now, this is interesting for many, many reasons. If we take a look at the Halcyon Company themselves, they were a brand new studio. It was an American privately financed media development company, headed by Victor Kubicek and Derek Anderson. Now, this is interesting for many reasons, and I think really indicates as to why Terminator Salvation was probably not in the best of hands. Derek Anderson, had a New York and London-based advertising agency. Utterly nothing to do with films at all. And Kubicek worked as a trader on the American Stock Exchange. So you have one man with respect to advertising and clearly some money behind him, and the other a very finance-based man. In May 2007, Halcyon acquired all of the rights in relationship to the Terminator franchise, and these rights would include the right to produce any future Terminator films, as well as all future merchandising and licensing rights, which is a massive, massive thing. I've spoken on this channel many, many times over how merchandise normally, by and large, far outweighs any of the profits, the net profit that you would get from any film. So the fact that they managed to secure the rights to full merchandise and all licensing was staggering. Now, interestingly enough, they also acquired certain revenue streams from Terminator 3 Rise of the Machines, as well as certain rights in the television project Terminator The Sarah Connor Chronicles. So this, in normal Hollywood terms, is a staggering, absolutely staggering deal. And as I said, they had the sole right to produce all Terminator projects in any new or existing media, again, off the back end of having certain revenue streams from current projects in the mix. Now, in the company's actions, you can very clearly see the two heads of the company at play. In November 2007, the company would then create its own video games subsidiary, Halcyon Games. And this they then used to make a video game adaptation of Terminator Salvation. But getting back to the production of Terminator Salvation itself, the two producers, the co-founders of Halcyon Company, decided that they would want to start a new trilogy. Again, they had the rights for a very limited time, but they had all of the rights. So they wanted to secure something for the long term, a payday for henceforth. Now, this purchase was financed by a loan by Pacificor, which was a hedge fund from Santa Monica. By July 19th, the project itself was actually in legal limbo due to a lawsuit between MGM and Halcyon subsidiary T-Asset. MGM had an exclusive window of 30 days to negotiate for distribution of the Terminator films. Now, when negotiating for Terminator 4, Halcyon rejected their initial proposal and MGM suspended negotiations. After the 30 days were over, MGM claimed that the period during which negotiations were suspended did not count and their exclusive period was still open. Halcyon obviously moved forward and asked the court for an injunction, allowing them to approach other distributors. And later the lawsuit was settled, with MGM getting a 30-day first right for refusal to finance and distribute the fifth Terminator film. Warner Brothers paid $60 million or so to acquire the United States distribution rights for Terminator Salvation, and Sony Pictures had paid just over $100 million to acquire the film distribution rights in all international territories. So Halcyon Productions have managed to secure a fairly healthy amount of money just off of distribution. Now, despite Terminator Salvation actually making a relatively okay profit, Halcyon Company filed for bankruptcy in 2009 as a response to a lawsuit from their own financier due to payment problems. Now, if we look at everything which they had done up until that point, it's very, very surprising to see that they had entered into any form of debt from financiers. But just from the brief background on the production of the film, you can see exactly why, because the people that were making it had such issues and why the film had such issues. Now, this is a film, to get to my own personal review, is something which I don't actually hate. Now, I will say this straight from the outset, is that I don't think this is the film which we should have had. Okay, this was set in post-apocalyptic America. We had an older John Connor, played by Christian Bale, and we had other people floating around him. We had a very strange and unusual take on a Terminator. Obviously, each and every single Terminator film tries to up the ante with a new and wild, wacky Terminator. This one was, of course, played by Sam Worthington, the TH, the Terminator human hybrid. And it's one of those ones which, on face value, it all is okay. It's not terrible. Okay, Marcus Wright obviously signs his body over for medical research following his execution, as he was a prisoner on death row. This was obviously, integrated into Skynet, and Skynet would move forwards and integrate him with Terminator technology. Now, I think where this film really lacked was the aesthetic, the very, very clear as day aesthetic, and I mean that pun intended because they were running around in the daytime. We know in the very first Terminator film that humans did not come out during the day. It was too dangerous. They would only go around at nighttime under the cover of the skies. And again, that's the other part of this film that was the main problem, is just the overall aesthetic. There were no laser weapons, there were only machine guns, and all of these other silly little continuity errors. And there are some, by and large, fairly huge continuity errors. However, I don't hate this film. It looks good. There are silly little elements here and there which make it just completely fall apart, i.e. Christian Bale jumping out of a helicopter or a plane. How did you get on the submarine, mate? That doesn't make any sense. But the overall aesthetic, how Terminators looked, they actually used working animatronic Terminators. I mean, the film itself is even dedicated to Stan Winston. There are so many elements that are likable in this film that they start to outweigh the bad. Now, again, I don't think this is a particularly great film by any stretch, but I do think it's better than most people give it credit for. And I think the reason why people don't like it as much as, say, the other films, or they give it much more of a bad rap, is simply aesthetic and continuity. If you were to remove that from the film, it's not a bad film. Obviously, it's plagued by production issues. We had the likes of Christian Bale absolutely throwing a tantrum on set like a spoilt child, a petulant little teenager. But overall, this is a fairly decent film with a cohesive storyline, but it's not cohesive when we pair it up with the rest of the films. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is where it starts to fall apart. But by and large, it's not a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, guys, that is my retrospective review and brief review of Terminator Salvation. I've long promised this to you. I tried to get this done before Terminator Dark Fate was released, but it just got away with me. I hope you did enjoy it nonetheless, and I hope it was worth the wait. If you would like to see me review the rest of the Terminator films, I mean, there's only essentially one now left to go. I'm still happy to do that. I mean, Terminator Genesis is interesting nonetheless. So if you'd like to see me do that, then please do let me know down below in the comment section. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. As always, I haven't missed age. Take care.